A lot of people say, I'm delaying kids or skipping them because they're expensive. And yes, kids are expensive. But here's the question most people don't ask. Do families with children actually end up financially worse off over time, or are we reading the data the wrong way? Welcome back to Money Made Simple. Today, we're going to follow the data and get past the headlines, because the popular claim that kids make you poor sounds obvious until you look at what's actually being compared. This video idea came from the same place many of my best topics do: research, reading, and the questions people bring up that make me stop and think, is that really true? And recently, I wrote a line in another script. Savings rates tend to increase once children arrive because responsibility reframes behavior. That immediately reminded me of a comment I see all the time. I don't want kids because I want to retire early, or I'll be wealthier if I don't have kids. So let's test that idea properly, not with assumptions, with data, the headline statistic, and why it's misleading. There's a statistic that gets repeated constantly. Households with kids have much less wealth than households without kids. And on the surface, it looks brutal. Using Survey of Consumer Finance's data, the median household with children has around $64,000 in net worth. The median household without children is closer to $115,000. At first glance, it seems like the conclusion is simple. Kids are expensive and kids make you poorer. But here's the problem. That comparison is technically true and still deeply misleading because it doesn't tell the real story. What it actually shows is that we're comparing groups that are different in major ways that have nothing to do with kids. Why parents versus non-parents isn't an apples to apples comparison. If you simply compare households with kids to households without kids, you're not comparing similar households. Parents are younger on average. They're earlier in their wealth building years. They're also more likely to include a meaningful share of single-parent households, which face a very different financial reality. Meanwhile, households without kids includes many people who are older, empty nesters, or adults who never had children, often at peak wealth stages. So when people say, parents have half the wealth of non-parents, what they're often really saying is, younger households earlier in their careers tend to have less wealth than households later in life. That's a life stage story, not a kids ruin your finances story. How researchers fix the comparison. The research I'm drawing from here is called Marriage, Kids, and the Picket Fence. It uses Survey of Consumer Finance's data, and instead of making the usual mistake, it asks a better question. Among similar households, does parenthood itself change wealth outcomes? To answer that correctly, the researchers control for major factors that strongly influence wealth. 1. Age and life cycle effects. Wealth typically grows over time, so they compare households within age bands like 25-34, 35-44, 45-54, and 55-64. This matters because a 30-year-old usually has less wealth than a 60-year-old, even if both make good decisions, simply because one has had decades more time to accumulate assets. 2. Marital or partner status. Household structure has a huge impact on wealth, so the paper doesn't lump everyone together. It separates 9 household types, including married parents, married couples without kids, cohabiting parents, single mothers, single fathers, single men without kids, and single women without kids. That distinction is critical because single parenthood and married parenthood are not the same financial experience. 3. Education. Education affects lifetime earnings, job stability, and the ability to save and invest. And importantly, adults with higher education are more likely to delay having children or not have children at all. So if you compare parents to non-parents without accounting for education, you're partly comparing groups with very different earning power and career paths. Once education is controlled for, a big portion of what looked like a kid effect turns out to be an education and timing effect. 4. Income, handled carefully. Income is the fuel behind saving and investing, so the paper is careful here. They don't just use raw income, they adjust for household size and model income over time, so it's not distorted by one unusually good year or one unusually bad year. The surprising result, parenthood barely changes wealth outcomes. Once researchers account for age, income, education, and demographics, something surprising happens. Parenthood barely moves the needle. The average wealth difference between parents and non parents shrinks to about 1.4 percentile points. In practical terms, if you line up two households that look the same on paper, similar age, income, and education, the household with children ends up only one or two spots higher or lower out of 100 in wealth rankings. And this pattern holds across the wealth distribution. So the headline level wealth gaps almost disappear once you're comparing people at the same stage of life. Having kids by itself doesn't meaningfully make households poorer or richer, where wealth differences actually come from. So if it's not simply kids, where do we see differences? The paper finds something much more specific. The real wealth advantage belongs to married parents, not parents in general, and not childless households, but the combination of marriage and parenthood. After controls, married parents have the highest wealth of all 9 household types. The most accurate takeaway is household structure matters more than kids. Family size matters, and the impact isn't linear. Households with 1 to 3 children tend to have similar or slightly higher wealth percentiles than childless households after controls. Households with 4 or more children tend to have lower wealth even after controls. That suggests the financial impact of children is nonlinear. It's not just whether you have kids, it's when you have them, how many, and the household structure you have while raising them. Why married parents build more wealth? The key factor. The biggest driver was simpler: homeownership. Married parents are significantly more likely to own a home at every income level. And here's the major insight: once homeownership is included in the model, the married parent wealth advantage largely disappears. So the data suggests something important. Marriage plus kids may nudge people towards stability, long term planning, and anchoring wealth in tangible assets. The human side: how kids can change your orientation to the future. Stepping outside the data for a moment, there's a personal element here. People often talk about the moment they first felt like an adult: college, a career job, buying a home. For some, it's when they become a parent, because the responsibility shifts. You're not just planning for yourself anymore. Kids can change how you see time, risk, and responsibility. Long term stability stops being a nice to have and becomes non negotiable, reframing the narrative. So the scary headline, "Kids Destroy Your Finances," is usually based on comparing people at different life stages. Once you control for those factors, parenthood itself barely changes wealth outcomes. Kids don't automatically make you wealthier, and they don't automatically make you poorer. What they may do is reframe responsibility, which can shape long term behavior. Can you build wealth on any life path? Yes. But the data does suggest that some paths are statistically easier. So I'm curious, what do you think? Do kids help, hurt, or mostly change the way people approach money and long term planning? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. If you found this helpful, hit the like button. See you in the next one.